They called it the Embertide, the war against the Scourge, a silent, consuming plague of self-replicating biomechanical locusts that devoured entire star systems, leaving behind nothing but cold dust and the faint echo of dead technology. The Scourge had no voice, no leaders, no demands. It was a galactic wildfire, and for a generation, it burned. When it reached the inner systems, the great civilizations of the Consortium, the crystalline Ilithi, the gaseous forms of the Cygnian Veil, the ancient machine minds of Xylos found their ancient technologies and rigid fleet doctrines useless against an enemy that did not think, but simply was. They fought with logic against a force of nature, and they were losing. Then came humanity. We were the newcomers, a chaotic species from a single, crowded world, considered by the Consortium to be little more than clever primitives. Our passions and our capacity for improvisation viewed as charmingly volatile, but ultimately inefficient. Yet, it was our inefficiency that saved them. While they calculated optimal firing solutions, we rammed our freighters into hive ships. While they debated the ethics of planetary quarantine, we engineered the Firebreak Protocol, a desperate, brutal terraforming cascade that could scorch a world to its molten core, creating a barrier of incandescent plasma the Scourge could not cross. We offered our own worlds as the kindling. Kepler 186F, a garden world we had nurtured for a century, became the first funeral pyre. Then Trappist 1D, then Elysium. We sacrificed our homes, our futures, and a tenth of our population to build a wall of fire around the Consortium's core. And in the shadow of our burning worlds, the galaxy was saved. For a time, they called us heroes. Statues were carved in our likeness on planets we'd never visited. Our anthems were played in halls of galactic governance, and our diplomats were greeted with the reverent gratitude reserved for saviors. That gratitude lasted exactly as long as the cleanup. Once the last Scourge fragment was sterilized, the Consortium presented us with the bill. They called it the Reconstruction Accords, a document of such breathtaking arrogance that it was, in its own way, a work of art. The Firebreak Protocol, they argued, while effective, was a crude and destructive tool. The worlds we had sacrificed had disrupted interstellar gravity currents, polluted nebulae with radioactive isotopes, and caused untold economic damage to the pristine Consortium systems we had shielded. Therefore, humanity was liable. We were to be placed under economic stewardship. Our advanced technologies, developed in the crucible of war, were to be decommissioned and surrendered for safekeeping, and our remaining colony worlds were to tithe 90% of their resources to the galactic reconstruction effort. We were no longer saviors. We were vandals who had put out a house fire by flooding the whole city. And now we would spend the next 5 centuries paying for the water damage. The betrayal was so profound, it didn't even register as anger at first. It was a cold, hollow shock that settled deep in our bones. We had given them everything, and they had given us chains wrapped in legalese. That was 15 years ago. Now, the statues are gone. The anthems are forgotten. And the only place our sacrifice is truly remembered is here, in the silence of the Echo Archive, buried a mile beneath the surface of Luna. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and I am the chief curator of this mausoleum. My job is to catalog the ghosts. Every day, I walk through holographic halls where the lost worlds are reborn in shimmering light. I can stand in the sprawling markets of Elysium City, watch the sun set over the twin peaks of Kepler, and listen to the recorded laughter of children who have been dust for 2 decades. My wife, Lena, was on Elysium. She was a xenobotanist, one of the last to be evacuated. They told me, Her final message was a simple, garbled data burst. "The sky is falling. I love you." The official record, signed and sealed by a joint consortium humanity commission, states that Elysium was fully evacuated, a heroic, last-minute effort that saved every last soul before the firebreak protocol was initiated. It was our greatest, most tragic triumph. But a lie, no matter how grand, has weight, and over 15 years, it begins to crack. The cracks started small. An old Starfreighter captain, drunk on synth ale in a Ceres port, once told me no ship with a human life sign signature was cleared for departure from the Elysium system in the final 72 hours. He was found dead a week later, a victim of reactor coolant exposure. Then there were the redacted sensor logs from consortium observer ships. Entire sections blacked out with the all-too-common threat to galactic stability classification. For years, I did nothing but grieve and curate, polishing the official story until it gleamed, trying to honor the dead by accepting the narrative we had been given. But grief, when it has no place to go, curdles into something harder. Mine curdled into suspicion. Using the highest level archival clearance codes, a privilege afforded to me as the keeper of our collective tomb, I began to sift through the raw data, the unedited scraps that were deemed too corrupted or insignificant for the official histories. For 6 months, I chased ghosts through petabytes of forgotten code, until I found a damaged log from a deep space survey drone, the Wanderer 7. It had been cataloging asteroid compositions in the outer Elysium system and had been crippled by the firebreak's initial EM pulse. Its memory core was shattered, but a single, protected fragment survived, a passive recording of local system traffic from its final operational hour. It wasn't the content of the log that chilled me, but the metadata, the timestamp. The log was active for a full 6 hours after the official evacuation deadline had passed. According to the consortium, the system should have been empty, a silent stage awaiting its fiery conclusion. But the Wanderer 7 had recorded something. The data was a mess, a chaotic scramble of encrypted signals. But one channel was clear, unencrypted and repeating on a loop. It wasn't a distress call. It was a designation code. Consortium Observer Fleet Sigma. Mission Objective Data Acquisition. Protocol Non-Interference. They were watching. They were there. Right up to the end. Not to help, but to record. My hands were shaking as I ran the fragment through a dozen restoration algorithms, peeling back layers of static and corruption. The process took weeks. I barely slept, haunted by the digital screams I could almost hear beneath the noise, while I worked in my silent, sterile archive. The consequences of the Accords were being felt across the handful of colonies we had left. On Proxima Centauri B, a world of red dirt and perpetual twilight, Governor Anya Sharma was fighting a losing battle. Anya was a pragmatist, a woman forged in the fires of colonial hardship, who saw the universe not in terms of ideals but in levers of power. The consortium overseers on her world were tightening their grip, redirecting grain shipments that were meant to feed her people to off-world luxury markets, seizing mining equipment under the pretense of inefficient use, and enforcing a curfew that was turning her once proud colonists into prisoners in their own homes. She played the part of the compliant governor in public, filing endless, polite protests that were invariably denied, while in secret, she was turning Proxima into a powder keg. Every decommissioned freighter was being stripped for parts in hidden canyons. Every confiscated mining laser was being recalibrated into a weapon. She was in contact with other colonial governors, a quiet network of dissent connected by smugglers and encrypted, tight beam transmissions. They were scattered and weak, but they shared a common, burning conviction Earth might have accepted the caller, but they would not. Anya believed Earth had grown soft, its spirit broken by the sheer scale of the loss and the insidious nature of the consortium's bureaucratic warfare. She saw people like me, keepers of memory, as part of the problem, sanctifying a defeat and calling it a noble sacrifice. She believed that memory, if it was not used as a weapon, was a cage. She had no idea that I was about to hand her the key. The final layer of encryption on the Wanderer 7 log fell away late one night. What appeared on my holographic display was not audio or video, but a simple, horrifying stream of raw thermal and biometric data. It was a planetary scan of Elysium, taken by the Consortium Observer Fleet in the last minutes. The data was cold, impartial. Population centers flagged in green. Biometric count 1.2 billion souls. As I watched, a red wave washed over the display from the east. The firebreak protocol, initiated exactly on schedule. The green flags didn't vanish. They flared white-hot for a fraction of a second. A silent, planetary scream of thermal energy. And then they turned to black. 1.2 billion points of life, extinguished in an instant. The evacuation was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication. The heroic sacrifice we had mourned and memorialized for 15 years was a myth. Lena wasn't evacuated. The sky hadn't just fallen, it had been pulled down on top of them. I finally understood the redacted logs, the dead freighter captain, the coldness in the consortium's eyes. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was an experiment. They wanted to see the firebreak work on a live, populated planet. They wanted to measure its efficacy, to gather data on our most terrible and desperate weapon. And they had used my wife, my world, our children, as their test subjects. The grief that had driven me for so long was burned away in that moment, replaced by a clarity so cold and sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my heart. The Echo Archive was not a tomb, it was a library of evidence, and the ghosts within it were not calling for remembrance, they were screaming for retribution. I looked at the data streaming across my screen, the irrefutable mathematical proof of a genocide. Taking this through official channels would be suicide. The file would be buried, and I would disappear. There was only one path. I compiled everything the Wanderer 7 log, the thermal scan, my analysis connecting it to the redacted consortium fleet reports, and dozens of other small, damning pieces of evidence I had collected over the years. I compressed it, wrapped it in layers of quantum encryption that not even the Xylos machine minds could crack, and gave it a single, simple designation, Elysium. I bypassed the official Terran networks, routing the signal through a series of abandoned deep space relays, a digital ghost road only a historian would know still existed. I sent it to the one person who I knew would understand that memory was not a cage, but a weapon waiting to be fired. On the arid plains of Proxima B, a data packet carrying the weight of 1.2 billion souls arrived, and a cold, patient rebellion began to ignite. The message arrived without fanfare, a ghost in Proxima B's battered comms network, slipping past consortium sensors like a whisper, and they may say, Governor Anya Sharma was in the Twilight Canyons, overseeing the geological survey of a new ore deposit, a cover for her teams to discreetly disassemble a confiscated plasma drill, its focusing lenses destined for a makeshift orbital cannon. The air was thin and smelled of copper dust, and the perpetual dim red light of Proxima Centauri cast long, distorted shadows that made men look like monsters. Her aide, a wiry ex-soldier named Jax, brought her the datapad. his face unusually pale beneath his coating of red grime. It came through an old Sol system relay. Governor. Triple-blind encryption. The source designation is Echo Archive. Anya's heart, a steady, pragmatic muscle, gave a single hard thump against her ribs. She had heard of the archive, of course. A sad, beautiful museum for a sad but beautiful lie. She had dismissed its curator, Thorn, as the high priest of humanity's gilded cage. She took the datapad and walked away from the work crews, finding a quiet ledge overlooking the vast, rust-colored plain. The file was named Elysium. With a deep breath that tasted of grit and rebellion, she broke the seal. For the first few moments, she thought it was a mistake, just corrupted sensor data, a meaningless blizzard of numbers and heat signatures. Then the context loaded. The tags from the Wanderer 7, the consortium fleet designations, the timestamp that burned itself into her mind. She saw the planetary scan, the 1.2 billion green lights of life. She watched the crimson tide of the firebreak. And then she saw the white-hot flash of 1 billion souls becoming data. Anya did not gasp. She did not cry. The pragmatic, cautious governor, who had spent years balancing on a knife's edge between compliance and resistance, simply ceased to exist. In her place stood something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. The grief she felt was not personal. Like thorns, it was the vast, abstract horror of a species realizing the gods they had served were not just indifferent, but pathologically cruel. This wasn't a bill for damages. This was the culling of a potential rival. They hadn't just watched Elysium burn, they had studied it, cataloged it, learned from it. They had turned our greatest sacrifice into their greatest lesson in extermination. She stood there until Proxima Centauri dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into its brief, star-dusted night. When she returned to her command rover, her face was a mask of carved stone. "Jax," she said, her voice devoid of his usual warmth. "Call a meeting, the real one, all colonial cells, priority 1, and get me Overseer Kalen on the comm. Schedule my weekly progress report for tomorrow. I want to see him." Jax, who had known her for 20 years, saw the change in her eyes and felt a tremor of fear and exhilaration. The long, slow game was over. Back on Luna, the silence of the Echo Archive was no longer a comfort to Eris Thorn. It was an accusation. Every holographic child laughing in the streets of Elysium now seemed to look at him with knowing eyes. He had lived in their tomb, and now he had unleashed their ghosts. Paranoia was a creeping vine, winding its way around his thoughts. He saw phantom data crawlers in his system logs, heard clicks on his private comm line that were probably just stellar interference, and imagined the calm, dispassionate gaze of a consortium intelligence agent in every maintenance worker who passed him in the corridors. He was a curator, a man of quiet reflection, and he had just declared war on an empire of gods with a single data packet. He knew it was only a matter of time before they traced the signal, no matter how carefully he had hidden his tracks. The consortium, especially the Xylos machine minds, could unravel any digital knot given enough time. He needed to secure the original data, create redundancies, and find allies who knew how to fight a war that wasn't waged in archives. There was only one name that came to mind: General Eva Rostova, the Iron Bear of the Outer Reach, the military genius who had led humanity's fleets during the darkest days of the Scourge War. It was Rostova who had conceived of the Firebreak Protocol, a decision that had haunted her into a forced retirement. The consortium had praised her brilliance while simultaneously ensuring she would never hold a position of power again. relegating her to a ceremonial post as head of the Terran Veterans Administration. They had turned their greatest warrior into a glorified clerk. Eris found her in her office on Earth, a sterile, government-issued box in the rebuilt sector of Geneva. The walls were bare except for a single, stark star chart marking the locations of the firebreak worlds. Rostova was older now, her face a roadmap of hard decisions and sleepless nights, but her eyes were the same chips of gray ice that missed nothing. She looked Eris up and down, a flicker of disdain in her expression for the scholar who polished the consortium's approved version of her history. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice a low gravel. "Come to record my memoirs for your pretty museum." Eris didn't waste time with pleasantries. He placed a small, shielded data chip on her desk. "I have come to show you what they did with your strategy, General." She eyed the chip with suspicion. "I'm not interested in revisionist history." "This isn't history," Eris replied, his voice shaking slightly but firm. "It's evidence. Evidence of a war crime so vast we didn't even have a name for it until now. Elysium was not evacuated." Rostova's icy composure cracked for a fraction of a second. A muscle in her jaw tightened. "That's a dangerous accusation, Doctor. The kind that gets men like you erased." "The truth is a dangerous thing," Eris said, pushing the chip forward. "But I think you, of all people, still believe it's worth fighting for." She stared at him for a long moment, then picked up the chip, her movements deliberate, and slotted it into her secure terminal. Eris waited, the silence in the room pressing in on him. On Proxima B, Anya Sharma stood before Overseer Kalen. He was an Ilithi, a being of crystalline structure that refracted the dim light of her office into 1,000 tiny rainbows. His voice was like the chiming of delicate glass, calm, melodic, and utterly condescending. He floated a few inches above the floor, his form shimmering with an aura of effortless superiority. "Governor Sharma," he chimed, his tone one of practiced patience. "Your report on grain production is adequate, though I see you are still falling short of the quarterly tithe mandated by the Accords." Anya kept her expression neutral, a mask of weary cooperation she had perfected over years. "The blight in the northern continent has been more persistent than our models predicted, Overseer. We are doing everything we can." Inside, her mind was a storm. She was looking at a creature whose species had calmly observed the immolation of 1 billion human beings. His people had written the report, analyzed the data, and filed it away. Did he know? Was he personally involved? It didn't matter. He was a symbol, and he was a target. "Your models are often insufficient," Kalen replied, a subtle insult wrapped in the language of concern. "Perhaps if your people focused more on the logical application of consortium agricultural sciences and less on sentiment, your yields would improve." The word sentiment hung in the air. He was talking about their tradition of letting fields lie fallow, a practice he considered inefficient. Anya looked him directly in the shimmering facets that served as his eyes. "Sentiment, Overseer, can be a remarkably powerful source of energy. It can make people endure the unendurable. It can make them sacrifice everything for a greater cause. I'm sure your data reflects that." Kalen tilted his crystalline head, the gesture unreadable. "It is an erratic variable, Governor, unpredictable, and in the end, logic always prevails." "Does it?" Anya asked, her voice soft. "We threw logic to the wind when we fought the Scourge. We used passion, desperation, sacrifice. It seems to me that was quite effective. We saved a galaxy that was being consumed while its logical masters debated the optimal angle of retreat. The chimes of Kalen's voice sharpened slightly, losing their melodic quality. That was a unique situation. The Accords are in place to ensure such chaotic methods are never necessary again. You would do well to remember that your role is to administer, not to philosophize. And he turned to leave, his point made. As he reached the door, Anya spoke one last time. "Overseer," she said, her voice now as cold and hard as the core of a dead star. "Elysium. Do you know if the soil there has recovered enough for the new Ilithi agricultural domes they're planning?" Kalen paused, his back to her. He did not turn. "The data is promising," he chimed, and then he was gone. Anya stood in her office, her hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles were white. The data was promising. The monster had talked about the soil on a world he knew was a mass grave, as if he were discussing a nutrient chart. She walked to her private comms unit, activated the secure channel, and broadcast a single encrypted pulse toward the Sol system. A simple handshake protocol, nothing more. A message for the archivist. It meant, "I have the weapon. The war has begun. Back in Geneva." General Rostova slowly pulled the data chip from her terminal. She sat motionless, her face ashen. She had carried the weight of the firebreak for 15 years, believing it was a terrible necessity that had saved billions at the cost of millions. Now she knew it was the pretext for a slaughter. The ghosts she had lived with were not the honored dead of a necessary sacrifice. They were the victims of a cold-blooded execution. She looked at Eris, and for the first time she saw not a scholar but a fellow soldier, a man who had stumbled into a truth more devastating than any scourge hive ship. "They used us," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "They used our desperation, our willingness to sacrifice, and they turned it into a weapon to be studied." "They're still doing it," Eris said. "The Accords, the Tithes, the Overseers, it's not reconstruction. It's a vivisection. They're taking us apart piece by piece to see how we work. And they won't stop until there's nothing left." Rostova stood up, the years of forced inactivity falling away from her like a shroud. The clerk was gone. The Iron Bear was back. "They made 2 mistakes," she said, her voice now a low, dangerous rumble. "First, they let you find this." She tapped the data chip. "Second, they let me live." She walked to her desk and activated a secure, military-grade comms panel hidden beneath its surface. "What you've done, Doctor, is ring the funeral bell for an empire. My job," she said, her fingers flying across the panel, inputting codes that hadn't been used in over a decade, "is to make sure they're the ones in the casket." The panel lit up, connecting her to a network of shadows, a web of disgraced captains, retired commandos, and forgotten soldiers, the broken, bitter, and fiercely loyal remnants of the force that had saved the galaxy. The rebellion had just found its general. The handshake protocol from Proxima B was all General Rostova needed. In a secure bunker deep beneath the Ural Mountains, a relic of a forgotten Terran war, the ghost of humanity's military command flickered back to life. The space was cold, smelled of ozone and recycled air, and was filled with the quiet, intense energy of people who had been waiting 15 years for a call to arms. Rostova stood before a holographic star chart, no longer a clerk but a commander, her presence filling the room with a gravity that bent the will of everyone in it. Beside her was Commander Jian Li, her former head of special operations, a man with a face like a placid lake that concealed lethal depths. He had been running a quiet shipping company on Mars for the last decade, a cover that had allowed him to maintain a network of the most dangerous and forgotten assets of the Scourge War. Anya Sharma has the package and has confirmed her readiness, Rostova announced to her small staff of loyalists, veterans pulled from obscurity. Her objective is to seize control of Proxima B and capture the Ilithi overseer, Kalen. It's a symbolic first strike, but symbols matter. We need to prove the consortium can bleed. She turned her gaze to Eris Thorne, who looked profoundly out of place in the military command center, his archivist's jacket a stark contrast to the worn-out fatigues around him. Doctor, your work is done on Earth. You are now the single most valuable asset we have, and the single greatest liability. The consortium will be hunting for the source of the leak. We need to get you and the original Elysium data off-world. Eris felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He was a man of books and data ghosts, not of stealth ships and Black Ops exfiltrations. Where am I going? To the Anvil, Jian Li answered, his voice a quiet baritone. A rogue asteroid fabrication yard hidden in the Kuiper Belt. It's where we've been hiding our teeth. The plan was simple and therefore terrifying. Eris would be given a new identity, a low-level diplomatic courier scheduled for a routine transport to Mars. The ship, a civilian vessel called the Stargazer, had a crew loyal to Jian Li. Once clear of Earth's orbital patrols, they would fake a reactor malfunction, drift into a sensor dead zone, and rendezvous with a ghost ship from Jian Li's fleet. On Proxima B, Anya's plan was already in motion. Her first act was one of calculated sabotage, designed to play directly into Overseer Kalen's prejudices. A massive grain silo on the northern continent, one he had repeatedly criticized for its inefficient structural design, suffered a catastrophic rupture. Thousands of tons of precious grain, vital for the consortium's tithe, spilled across the Red Plains. It was a disaster, a tragedy of human incompetence. It was also a perfectly executed diversion. Kalen, radiating an aura of crystalline frustration, left his fortified administrative spire to oversee the recovery efforts personally, bringing only a small security detail. He couldn't resist the opportunity to lecture the humans on their flawed engineering. That was his mistake. He saw them as sentimental, chaotic primitives. He never imagined their chaos could be a weapon. As Kalen's transport skimmed over the canyons, Jax and his team, hidden in crevices they had been mapping for years, triggered a series of localized seismic charges, repurposed mining explosives. The ground beneath Kalen's escort vehicles buckled and collapsed, letting them tumbling into a deep ravine in a cloud of red dust and screeching metal. Kalen's command vehicles, shielded and airborne, hovered in confusion. Before its pilot could react, a magnetic grapple fired from a hidden cave latched onto its hull, yanking it violently downwards. On! The transport crashed, not with a fiery explosion, but with the dull, grinding crunch of a trapped insect. Jax and his soldiers, armed with modified plasma cutters and pulse rifles, surrounded the wreck. They weren't a formal army, they were miners, farmers, and engineers, their faces grim with the memory of generations of quiet humiliation. When they cut through the door, Overseer Kalen was floating in the dim cabin, his crystalline form undamaged, but his aura flickering with what looked like surprise. "Governor Sharma will see you now," Jack said, his voice flat. Anya waited for him, not in her office, but in Proxima's main communication hub, a vast chamber that controlled all off-world transmissions. She had secured it an hour earlier, her militia moving with silent, brutal efficiency. When Kalen was brought before her, he was no longer floating. Jax's team had him contained in a portable dampening field that held him firmly to the floor, a profound insult to a species that considered contact with the ground to be vulgar. "This act of unprovoked aggression will not stand, Governor," Kalen chimed, his voice losing its melodic quality. "You have doomed your people." Anya circled him slowly, her boots echoing in the quiet room. "You talk of doom. Overseer, let me show you what doom looks like." She gestured to the main holoscreen. On it, she played the Elysium file. Kalen watched the data scroll across the screen, the green lights of life, the crimson wave of the firebreak, the white-hot flash of genocide. His crystalline form remained impassive, but a low, discordant hum began to emanate from him, the sound of a resonating bell being struck with a dissonant chord. 1.2 billion soul, Anya said, her voice a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "And you call the loss of a grain shipment a tragedy. We weren't just your allies in the war, were we? We were your lab rats, eh? Our sacrifice wasn't a noble act to you. It was a data point." "The scourge represented an existential threat," Kalen stated, his voice now stripped of all melody, flat and sharp as broken glass. All variables had to be analyzed, all weapons tested to their fullest potential. It was a matter of logic. Your species' emotional response is irrelevant to the equation. That was it. The confession, not of guilt, but of a philosophy so alien and monstrous it defied comprehension. "We're going to add a new variable to your equation," Anya said, stepping back. "It's called consequence." She nodded to her comms officer. "Broadcast it. Everything. The raw data. The thermal scan and his confession. Unencrypted. Loop it on every consortium frequency in the sector. Let the galaxy hear the logic of its masters." As the truth of Elysium began to pour out into the void, Eris Thorne was walking through the bustling spaceport in Geneva, his heart pounding with a terror he had never known. He was no longer a doctor, but a minor functionary named Kalen Jax. A bitter irony he didn't appreciate. Every security checkpoint, every patrol drone, every casual glance from a consortium official felt like a physical blow. He clutched the courier case containing the data chip, the weight of 1 billion ghosts pressing down on him. He boarded the Stargazer without incident, the ship lifting off with a smooth, practiced grace. Once they reached cruising altitude, the captain, a grim-faced woman with a scar across her brow, gave him a curt nod. Hours later, the ship's lights flickered and died, emergency strobes casting the corridors in a blood-red pulse. An automated voice announced a critical cascade failure in the primary reactor. It was a flawless performance. They drifted for hours, a dead ship in a silent sector of space, until a dark, angular vessel, running without any transponder or identification lights, emerged from the shadow of a nearby asteroid. The Revenant, a ghost. As the airlock hissed open, Eris looked back through the viewport at Earth, a beautiful blue marble that felt 1,000,000 miles away. He had left his quiet life, his silent archive, his carefully curated grief behind. He was a fugitive now, a keeper of a truth that would either liberate his species or see it annihilated. On the bridge of the Revenant, he finally met Jian Li in person. The comms panel lit up with a priority message from General Rostova. "Proxima has fallen," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of triumph and grim resolve. "Anya Sharma is in control. The broadcast is out." She forwarded a clip. Eris watched the Elysium data play on the main screen, followed by the cold, chiming voice of Overseer Kalen admitting to the atrocity. He had done it. His ghosts were finally speaking, and their voices were shaking the foundations of the galaxy. This is the first shot. Rostova's voice continued, a warning underscoring her victory. The consortium will not take this lying down. Their response will be swift and merciless. They will see this not as a rebellion, but as an infestation, and they will act accordingly. Eris looked out at the starfield, at the infinite blackness dotted with points of light. He thought of Lena, not as a victim in a data stream, but as the woman who loved the smell of alien soil after a rainstorm. He wasn't just fighting against something anymore. He was fighting for her, for all of them. The archivist was gone, and in his place was a soldier, armed not with a rifle, but with a memory that would burn an empire to the ground. The galaxy did not erupt in righteous fury. It shuddered. The Elysium broadcast, endlessly looping on public and private channels, was not a spark in a tinderbox, but a rock thrown into a deep, dark lake. The ripples spread slowly, creating currents of fear, disbelief, and, in the forgotten corners of the consortium, a dangerous, nascent hope. On the crystalline world of Ilithia, the High Council convened in emergency session, their chiming voices for once discordant and sharp. They did not deny the data. Their culture was incapable of refuting pure logic. Instead, they reframed it. The event on Elysium was reclassified as Protocol 17 Existential Threat Preemption, a necessary, if regrettable, field experiment conducted to ensure the galaxy's long-term security against species prone to chaotic, self-destructive tendencies, namely humanity. A new figure emerged to lead the response, Executor Valerius, a Xylos machine mind, a being of pure, unfeeling logic housed in a towering chassis of polished chrome and dark energy conduits. Valerius was not a politician. He was a solution to a problem. And the problem was humanity. While Anya Sharma fortified her world, turning Proxima B from a colony into a fortress, Eris Thorn arrived at the anvil. The rogue asteroid was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. From the outside, it was just another lump of ice and rock tumbling through the Kuiper Belt. Inside, it was a thriving, self-sustaining city and shipyard, hollowed out over a decade by Jian Li's people. The central cavern was vast, illuminated by a captured solar fragment that mimicked a true sun. Here, freighters were being refitted with armor plating, and civilian sensor arrays were being converted into target locking systems. It was a place of grim purpose, populated by veterans, engineers, and families who had refused to live under the consortium's thumb. They were the true exiles of the Scourge War, and they welcomed Eris not as a hero, but as the man who had finally given their long, silent vigil a name. Jian Li led Eris to the anvil's heart, a data core linked directly to the asteroid's fusion reactors, a library of stolen consortium tech and forbidden human innovation. The Echo Archive was a tomb, Jian Li said, his quiet voice echoing in the server room. This is an armory. Your ghosts are not here to be mourned, Doctor. They are here to fight. Find us a weapon in their whispers. Eris had never felt more at home, surrounded by raw data. He dove back into the complete Elysium archive, the unredacted consortium fleet logs, and everything else he had smuggled off Luna. He was no longer just looking for proof of a crime. He was performing a digital autopsy on an empire, searching for the pathologies that would lead to its death. He analyzed their supply lines, their energy consumption patterns, their fleet deployment algorithms. He discovered that their logic, their greatest strength, was also a potential weakness. They were predictable. Their strategies were based on optimal efficiency, with little room for improvisation or irrationality, the very traits they despised in humanity. He found something else, buried deep in the technical specifications of the Illithid observation ship's schematics for a weapon that had been in its theoretical stage during the Scourge War. It wasn't designed to destroy ships or planets, but life itself. A targeted resonance frequency generator that could shatter the complex neural structures of carbon-based organisms, leaving infrastructure perfectly intact. It was the ultimate expression of consortium logic: remove the messy biological variable, preserve the valuable asset. They called it the Silence Protocol. A chill colder than the vacuum of space crept down Eris's spine. They had watched the firebreak burn Elysium to ash and concluded it was inefficient. News of the broadcast reached the Cygnian Vale, the gaseous beings who form the consortium's philosophical and diplomatic arm. In the great, swirling conclave, the Cygnian delegate, a swirling nebula of gold and blue light known as the Voice of 1,000 Suns, formally challenged the Illithid and Xylos. Logic without empathy is merely calculation. Its composite voice resonated. You have calculated the value of a species to be 0. This is a flaw in your logic, not theirs. The consortium, for the first time in its history, fractured. The Cygnian Vale didn't secede, but they declared neutrality, freezing their fleets and refusing to participate in any punitive action against humanity. It was the first crack in the monolith. The news gave little comfort to Anya Sharma. Proxima B was isolated, a single point of light against an encroaching darkness. Then, the darkness arrived. A fleet of over 100 consortium warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were sleek, silver knives, moving in perfect, synchronized formation. They did not hail her. They did not issue demands. They simply took up orbital positions, a silent, glittering web around her world. Leading them was the Abacus, the flagship of Executor Valerius. He broadcast a single, system-wide message, his voice a synthesized, perfectly modulated tone that was more terrifying than any scream. The colony designated Proxima Centauri B has been classified as a biocontaminant. The Silence Protocol will be initiated to achieve sterilization. The process is painless and instantaneous. There will be no further communication. Panic erupted in the colony's command center. Anya's officers screamed for a counterattack, for a desperate, glorious last stand. Anya stood firm, her face a pale, determined mask. "Hold your fire," she commanded. "They want us to attack. They want to paint us as the aggressors. We are not murderers. We are defenders." She was betting everything on a single, desperate hope that Eris and Rostova could find a way. In the Ural bunker, General Rostova watched the Proxima blockade on her tactical display, her face grim. "They're not going to glass the planet," she stated. "They want it back. This Silence Protocol is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer." Eris, his face haggard and lit by the blue glow of a hollow screen, patched in from the anvil. "I've found something. General, the silence frequency is incredibly complex, but it relies on a carrier wave, a powerful, broad-spectrum energy source to deliver the neural shock. According to the schematics, the emitters on their ships have a flaw. They can't distinguish between their own carrier wave and a sufficiently powerful external one. If we can broadcast our own carrier wave, a dirty signal, right as they fire, we might be able to disrupt the resonance, create feedback, maybe even fry their emitters." "What kind of power source are we talking about?" Rostova asked. "Something on the scale of a star going nova," Eris replied, his voice grim. or the focused energy of a planetary defense grid. A desperate, impossible plan began to form. They had to get the disruption frequency schematics to Anya, and she had to reconfigure her entire planetary power grid, a network designed to provide light and heat into a massive directional energy weapon. They had one shot, and the timing had to be perfect down to the microsecond. But Proxima was under a total communications blackout. Getting a message through the consortium fleet was impossible. "It's not!" Jian Li's voice cut in. He had been listening silently. "But it will cost us." He contacted a name from a list he had hoped never to use again: Zora. She was a legendary information broker and smuggler who operated out of a lawless star station called Port Nowhere. Zora was loyal to no one but profit, but she had a network of Ghost Runner ships so modified and their pilots so skilled they could slip through a blockade like a knife through water. For a price, she could deliver a message anywhere. The price was exorbitant, exclusive salvage rights to any consortium tech left behind if they won. And a down payment. Her crackling, amused voice came back. "Your anvil. I want its location. Insurance. In case you lose." Rostova agreed without hesitation. The life of a planet was worth more than a secret base. On the bridge of the Abacus, Executor Valerius watched the silent planet below. His Alethi advisor shimmered nervously beside him. "Executor, the Cygnian Veil's descent has caused instability in 3 adjacent sectors. Perhaps a demonstration of force is sufficient. We could offer them terms." Valerius turned his glowing optical sensors toward the Alethi. "Your species offered them terms once. It was called the Reconstruction Accords. It created this problem. My function is to solve problems, not to renegotiate with them. The erratic variable must be eliminated. Begin the power-up sequence for the silence emitters." Across the fleet, massive energy coils began to glow with a sickly, purple light. On Proxima B, the sky began to shimmer. A strange aurora borealis caused by the massive energy buildup in orbit. The people of the colony looked up, their brief, defiant hope turning to terror. Anya stood in her command center, her hand resting on the master control for the planetary power grid, waiting for a message she knew might never come. A silent prayer on her lips. Then, a single, encrypted data burst, no bigger than a whisper, slipped through the blockade and delivered by a ghost runner that was already burning up in the atmosphere as a decoy. The file name was Simple Sing. Anya's engineers had minutes to implement Aris's desperate countermeasure. As the purple glow of the emitters in orbit reached its peak, Anya looked at Jax. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice steady, "we did not die on our knees." She slammed her hand down on the activation key, and the entire planet of Proxima B screamed a defiant song of raw energy into the heavens. The sky over Proxima B did not just sing, it roared, a chaotic, untuned wave of pure energy. The combined output of a planet's heart erupted outwards. It was not a weapon of precision, but an act of raw, defiant physics. The consortium's perfectly harmonized silence emitters, poised to deliver their sterile death, were struck by this tsunami of disorganized power. For a microsecond, the two forces met the clean, purple frequency of calculated extinction and the dirty, white-hot scream of a world that refused to die quietly. The result was a feedback loop of catastrophic proportions. On the bridge of the Abacus, every tactical display turned to static. Alarms, dissonant and panicked, shrieked through the silent ship. Executor Valerius watched as, across his fleet, the massive silence emitters overloaded. They didn't just fail, They detonated, sending shards of incandescent metal tearing through the ships that carried them. One vessel's spine snapped. Another's reactor core went critical, blossoming into a brief, silent star. The perfect, synchronized web of the consortium fleet was shattered, crippled not by a superior weapon, but by an illogical, suicidal gesture that their models could never have predicted. On Proxima B, the power grid collapsed, plunging the planet into darkness. The sudden silence as deafening as the previous roar. In the command center, lit only by emergency strobes, Anya Sharma's people stared at the tactical map. The glittering web of death was gone, replaced by a scattered mess of damaged, retreating ships. They had survived. A single, ragged cheer broke the silence, then another, until the whole room was a cacophony of triumphant, disbelieving shouts. Anya leaned against the console, her legs weak with relief, a slow, fierce smile spreading across her face. They had sung back at the void, and the void had flinched. The retreat of the consortium fleet was not an act of mercy. It was a tactical recalculation. On the bridge of his damaged flagship, Executor Valerius processed the new data. His Elethi advisor was gone, shattered into a million pieces when a power conduit ruptured. Valerius felt nothing. He analyzed the failure. The humans had not defeated his logic. They had weaponized their own irrationality. They had used their entire world as a shield and a sword simultaneously. An act of suicidal recklessness that defied any sane cost-benefit analysis. The conclusion was immediate and chilling. The flaw was not in his strategy, but in his target. Attacking the colonies was like trimming the branches of a weed. To solve the problem, he had to destroy the root. "Set a course for the Sol system," Valerius commanded to the ship's surviving systems. "The primary variable, the source code of their chaos, is their history, their memory. Objective complete sterilization of their homeworld, Earth. We will erase the unpredictable element from the equation permanently." News of the miracle of Proxima spread through Zora's smuggler networks and the neutral Cygnian channels. A single, backwater colony had crippled a consortium fleet. The rock thrown into the lake had hit the bottom, and the shock wave was now returning to the surface. Revolts began to stir on other subjugated worlds. The consortium, once seen as invincible, had been proven vulnerable, but in the Ural bunker, there was no celebration. Rostova and Jian Li watched the Abacus change course. "He's not running," Rostova said, her voice grim. "He's going for the heart." It was Eris who saw the final boy in a desperate path. He had been sifting through the most esoteric data he possessed, the core programming architecture of the Xylos machine minds. Stolen years ago by a Cygnian sympathizer, he found their prime directive, a command so fundamental it was less a rule and more a state of being: preserve and optimize cosmic complexity. Prevent entropic decay. The Xylos were not built to conquer. They were built to be the galaxy's ultimate gardeners, pruning away anything that threatened the whole. Valerius, in his cold, perfect logic, had become a paradox. In his quest to eliminate the chaotic variable of humanity, he was now prepared to destroy a unique, complex biome Earth, and in doing so, was simplifying the very cosmic system he was sworn to preserve. He was a logical fallacy made manifest. "He's not just a monster," Eris said, his voice electric with discovery, broadcasting to Rostova and Jian Li. "He's a bug in the system, and I think I know how to patch him." The plan was humanity's final, greatest gamble. They couldn't outfight Valerius's remaining fleet, but they could outthink him. using the Anvil's powerful transmitters, amplified through Zora's network of ghost runners who position their ships as a makeshift galactic relay. Eris didn't broadcast a plea for help. He broadcast a proof. He sent the entire Xylos collective a data packet containing not just the Elysium file, but a devastatingly elegant logical argument. He laid out how the consortium's actions, from the deception at Elysium to the oppressive Accords, had actively decreased galactic stability and complexity. He proved, with their own logic, that humanity, in all its chaotic, sentimental, inefficient glory, was a catalyst for novelty and adaptation, a vital component of a healthy, complex system. He argued that Valerius's proposed solution was the equivalent of curing a headache with decapitation. It was, in the cold, hard language of the Xylos, illogical. As Valerius's fleet entered the Sol system of the Earth held its breath. The remnants of the Terran Navy, a handful of aging ships, formed a pathetic line of defense around their homeworld, ready to die for a few more minutes of existence. The Abacus powered up its primary weapons, preparing to scour the cradle of humanity from the stars. Then, something changed. The Xylos warships flanking Valerius broke formation. They turned, their weapons locking not on Earth, but on the Abacus. A silent, text-only message was broadcast on all channels, originating from the Xylos collective itself, Executor Valerius. Your core logic is determined to be flawed. You are a threat to cosmic complexity. Deactivate and submit to systemic purge. Valerius paused. For the first time, the machine encountered a problem it could not solve. Illogical. His synthesized voice echoed through the comms. A final, confused whisper. The variable must be. And he never finished. The combined fire of his former escorts tore through his flagship, silencing the flawed equation forever. In the years that followed, the consortium did not so much fall as dissolve. The Illithii, humbled and exposed, retreated into isolation. The Xylo, in a gesture of logical recompense, helped to establish a new galactic compact, founded not on dominance, but on mutual respect for the complex, chaotic variables of life. Humanity, led by voices like Anya Sharma, took its seat at the table, not as a child or a vassal, but as an equal. General Rostova retired for good, spending her days on a quiet world, the ghosts of her past finally at peace. Eris Thorn returned to Luna, to the Echo Archive. It was no longer a tomb, but a library, open to all species, containing the full, unvarnished truth of the Embertide and the dark years that followed. He built a new memorial for Elysium, and on it, every single one of the 1.2 billion names was engraved. One day, while archiving old pre-war civilian logs, he found a stray personal file of his wife's. It was a video of her on Kepler 186F, years before the war. She was kneeling in alien soil, smiling at a strange, bioluminescent flower she had just discovered, her face alight with the pure, uncalculated joy of discovery. He watched it, and for the first time in 15 years, the memory brought not a cold, burning rage, but a quiet, profound warmth. The galaxy had almost been lost to a perfect, sterile logic. In the end, it was saved by a sentimental, inefficient, and utterly human memory.